Chapter 1. The Forgotten Project of a Genius. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Steven Spielberg was living through the golden era of his career. He was a legend, already having changed the language of cinema forever. His name stood next to some of the most iconic films of all time. Audiences all over the world were still reeling from the adventures of Indiana Jones, the terror of Jaws, and the wonder of E.T. the extraterrestrial. Studios trusted him blindly. Whatever he touched turned into a box office sensation. But few people knew that, during this period of triumph, Spielberg began working on a project that was radically different from anything he had done before. It was not a family adventure. It was not a historical epic. It was not a heartwarming tale of friendship or courage. Instead, it was something deeply personal, disturbing, obsessive. The project was called Whisper Lane. At least, that was the working title scribbled in his early notes and draft scripts. There was almost nothing about it in public interviews, press releases, or studio archives.
No trailers.
No official stills.
No announcements.
It was as if the project had been erased from history before it even had the chance to be born. According to rare insider accounts, the idea came to him during a long creative break. Tired of the blockbuster routine, Spielberg secluded himself in his private office, filling notebooks with strange sketches and fragments of thoughts. The story had come to him in a dream, or rather a series of dreams, repeating nightmares of the same street, the same empty houses, the same whispering voices that seemed to follow him into waking life. The concept of Whisper Lane was unlike anything Hollywood had seen from him. It was an experimental horror film with surreal elements. No clear antagonist. No happy ending. It was supposed to explore the invisible fears that live in ordinary places. Childhood streets, empty rooms, familiar faces that suddenly seem wrong. The main idea of the script revolved around a seemingly normal suburban street where reality began to fall apart at night. The residents heard voices behind the walls. The geometry of the houses changed when no one was looking. People would disappear without a trace. Time would loop. The whispers, faint, indecipherable, would drive the characters slowly insane. Spielberg didn't want big stars in the film. He wanted unknown actors to make the horror feel more grounded and intimate. The shooting style was supposed to be minimalist, handheld cameras, natural lighting, long silent takes. He planned to experiment with audio design, using low-frequency sounds and layered whisper tracks that would make the audience uncomfortable without knowing why. But the project quickly became problematic. Studio executives were confused and nervous. They were expecting another crowd-pleaser from their most profitable director. Instead, they saw fragmented storyboards filled with disturbing images. Empty swings moving in the wind, dark basements filled with static TVs, faceless figures standing at the end of the street. There were heated discussions behind closed doors. Spielberg, usually calm and diplomatic, became obsessed with the project's secrecy. Crew members signed strict NDAs. Set designs were built on private sound stages away from the main studio lot. Some claimed he even destroyed early footage himself after test screenings didn't go as planned. The film entered what industry insiders called development hell. Months turned into years. Spielberg, burdened by the studio's pressure and his own perfectionism, grew distant from the project. Eventually, the studio pulled the plug quietly. The official reason given was creative differences. But the truth was more complicated. Some rumors suggested that test audiences reacted violently to the few scenes they were shown. Others believed that the film itself had started to affect Spielberg on a personal level. His mood changed, his work slowed down, and he became more superstitious. Whatever the real reasons were, Whisper Lane disappeared from all production schedules. No one talked about it publicly. No official statement was ever made. For many years, the project was nothing more than a dark footnote in Spielberg's otherwise glittering career. Only fragments remained, whispers of a film that never existed, or perhaps a film that was never meant to be seen. Chapter 2: The Secret Film Crew. According to scattered rumors and fragments of forgotten stories, the production of Whisper Lane was unlike any other project Steven Spielberg had ever undertaken. While the rest of Hollywood operated under bright lights, press releases, and carefully staged promotional campaigns, this film was created in complete isolation. Spielberg, obsessed with the purity of fear and the authenticity of human emotion, allegedly demanded conditions of absolute secrecy. The filming location itself was never publicly revealed. Some claimed it was deep within a forest in Northern California. Others whispered about an abandoned mining town rented for months and cut off from civilization. There were no typical studio markings, no trailers with stars' names, no security guards at the gates. Only a small, almost invisible crew working under the cover of secrecy. Casting for the film was particularly unusual. Spielberg reportedly refused to hire professional actors. Instead, the casting team sought out people with real-life psychological traumas, phobias, and unresolved fears. Former soldiers, survivors of accidents, individuals with near-death experiences, and those who had lived through personal tragedies. These were the people selected for the film. They were not chosen for their ability to perform, but for the scars they carried inside. Recruitment often happened in strange places: psychiatric clinics, support groups, and isolated communities. Some participants were approached on the street, offered contracts after long and unsettling interviews about their worst memories. The selection process focused not on appearance or talent, but on emotional vulnerability and psychological instability. The contracts these participants signed were equally bizarre. Written in deliberately vague legal language, the documents bound them to lifelong confidentiality. They prohibited not only discussing the production, but also forbade contact with any press, studios, or even friends and family regarding the project. Breach of contract was said to result in severe financial penalties and possible legal persecution. What made the project even more disturbing were the stories that emerged about the methods used on set. Whispered accounts suggested that the crew engaged in psychological experiments and ritualistic practices designed to push the cast to the edge of their sanity. Allegedly, Spielberg hired consultants from unconventional fields, experts in hypnosis, fear conditioning, and experimental therapy. On set, participants were subjected to long periods of sensory deprivation, isolation in complete darkness, and sudden, orchestrated terrors without warning. Actors were kept in a constant state of unease. It was rumored that strange sounds were broadcast at night, echoing through the woods or abandoned structures, designed to unsettle and confuse them. The film was not scripted in a traditional sense. Rather, it was constructed around the real emotional reactions and breakdowns of its cast. Stories persisted that certain scenes were shot only once, using the authentic terror of the participants. Some whispered that occult symbols were present on set, that ritualistic practices were used to heighten fear, and that spiritual consultants advised Spielberg on how to create an environment that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Perhaps most unsettling was what happened after filming wrapped. Many of the cast members disappeared from public life entirely. Their names never appeared in credits, and they never returned to acting. Some changed their identities, relocated to remote areas, or seemingly vanished without a trace. Occasional investigations into their whereabouts led nowhere. Attempts to contact them were met with silence or stories of mental breakdowns, isolation, and even hospitalization. Among Hollywood insiders, Whisper Lane became a ghost story, a project that technically existed but left behind no concrete evidence. No trailers, no official stills, no confirmed cast list. Only fragments of legend passed through word of mouth, surviving like echoes in an empty theater. The crew who worked on the technical aspects of the production were equally elusive. Camera operators, sound engineers, set designers, all signed the same contracts and disappeared from the public eye. Attempts by journalists and documentarians to track down these individuals over the years were met with closed doors and unanswered questions. To this day, some believe that Whisper Lane was never intended to be released. that it was less a film and more an experiment, a personal obsession of Spielberg's, a dark exploration of fear that was too real, too disturbing to ever see the light of day. Others claim that footage of the film still exists, locked away in a private archive, inaccessible to anyone but its creator. Whatever the truth may be, the legend of the secret film crew continues to haunt the edges of cinematic history. A forgotten project that defied Hollywood's rules, driven by a genius who, for one brief and terrifying moment, sought to capture pure, unfiltered human fear and left behind only silence and mystery. Chapter 3. The one and only screening. It was said that Spielberg eventually completed the film. Despite all the secrecy, despite the endless rumors surrounding the production, the movie was finished. There was no grand premiere, no advertising campaign, no posters, and no trailers. The film was never mentioned in the press. Instead, there was only one screening, a private, highly classified event held behind closed doors. It took place in a small, windowless screening room on the Universal Studios lot, late at night, long after the rest of the building had gone dark. The invited audience consisted only of a handful of people: senior producers from DreamWorks, executives from Universal, and a few trusted insiders from the industry. Every guest was required to leave their phones and devices outside. Armed security stood at the doors. Everyone who entered the room had signed multiple layers of non-disclosure agreements. The atmosphere was heavy, almost ceremonial, as if those present were about to witness something not meant for ordinary eyes. When the film began, it became immediately clear that this was not a conventional horror movie. There was no traditional structure, no familiar rhythm of tension and release. The footage was raw, unsettling, and disorienting. Viewers later claimed that the film operated like an invasive psychological weapon. It bypassed conscious thought and attacked the subconscious directly. Its imagery, sound design, and editing seemed calibrated to draw out deeply buried personal fears, things the viewer didn't even know they were afraid of. As the screening continued, the room grew colder. Some viewers reported experiencing physical symptoms: shortness of breath, rapid heartbeat, cold sweats. Others sat frozen in their seats, unable to look away but desperate for it to end. The film moved in unpredictable ways, shifting from scenes of unbearable stillness to flashes of incomprehensible violence. It blurred the line between reality and nightmare so completely that several attendees later admitted they weren't sure if certain moments had been on the screen or in their minds. When the film finally ended, the room was silent. Not the usual awkward silence of people processing a difficult movie, but a suffocating, hollow quiet that pressed down on everyone like a weight. No one clapped. No one spoke. Some sat staring at the blank screen long after the last frame had faded. Others sat with their heads in their hands, quietly sobbing. There were reports that at least one person had suffered a panic attack and had to be helped from the room. Hours passed before anyone said a word. Conversations, when they finally began, were fragmented and hushed. The executives were visibly shaken. Some refused to comment at all. One producer reportedly locked themselves in their office for the rest of the night. Another was seen pacing the parking lot alone, chain-smoking until dawn. It was clear that Spielberg's film had accomplished something unprecedented. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't art in the traditional sense. It was an experiment, a psychological weapon disguised as cinema. It exposed vulnerabilities, excavated memories, and confronted viewers with parts of themselves they had spent their entire lives avoiding. After that night, the film disappeared. No copies were released. No further screenings were scheduled. Universal executives declared that the movie was too dangerous for public release. They cited ethical concerns, potential lawsuits, and the unpredictable psychological effects it could have on unprepared audiences. The only people who had ever seen the film remained silent. Some left the industry entirely. Others refused to discuss the experience under any circumstances. Over the years, fragments of their reactions leaked out, Cryptic interviews, vague warnings, nervous laughter covering real fear. But no concrete details ever emerged. The footage, if it still existed, was locked away in a vault somewhere, guarded not by security systems but by the collective will of those who had survived that single screening. And so the legend grew. People whispered about the film in closed circles, speculated about its content, and wondered whether it still existed at all. But one thing remained certain: there had been only one screening, and those who had witnessed it would never be the same. Chapter 4. Why the film was banned. It was said that Steven Spielberg himself was the one who insisted the film should never be released. According to the legend, it was not the studio executives, not the producers, not any outside pressure, but Spielberg's own decision that sealed the fate of the film. The story went that even a filmmaker of his experience and creative power had underestimated the true impact of what he had created. The movie was not simply terrifying in the traditional sense of horror cinema. It was not about monsters, ghosts, or violence. It was something else entirely. It was said to operate on a psychological level so profound and invasive that it bypassed the conscious mind and struck directly at the viewer's deepest fears, insecurities, and traumas. Spielberg, according to those few who claim to know the truth, realized this only after the single private screening held for DreamWorks producers and the Universal Studio executives. The screening had been a disaster not in technical terms, but in human terms. The reaction of the audience was far beyond what anyone had anticipated. People left the room in silence, unable to speak, their faces pale and expressionless. Some were reportedly in shock for hours. Others broke down in tears or suffered panic attacks. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just discomfort. The film had reached into their minds and revealed to them something they could neither control nor understand. What truly disturbed Spielberg, the legend suggested, was not just the effect on the audience, but the realization that the film was capable of doing this on a mass scale. If released publicly, millions of people would be exposed to what he now considered a form of psychological weaponry. Spielberg, who had always believed in the power of cinema to move, inspire, or entertain, was horrified by the idea that his work could damage people instead. According to the story, the decision was made in the days following the screening. No public release, no further discussion. The official explanation given within the studio was vague. Something about creative differences, unfinished post-production, or legal complications. But among those involved, there was no doubt about the real reason. Spielberg ordered that all physical materials related to the film be collected and secured. The original screenplay was destroyed. All working copies of the film were erased or shredded. Only the master reels remained, locked away in a highly restricted section of the studio archives. The location of this archive became a subject of rumor and fascination. Some believed it was stored in a secured underground facility owned by Universal Studios, a place used to store rare and sensitive film materials. Others claimed it was kept in Spielberg's private collection, hidden away in an undisclosed location. But the most persistent version of the story stated that the sole surviving copy of the film was stored in the official Universal Studios archive, a heavily guarded vault to which only a handful of people, the company's highest-ranking executives and legal guardians, had access. In the years that followed, the legend of the lost film grew in mystery and darkness. No official records of the film's production existed. It was as though the entire project had been wiped from the studio's history. Contracts, schedules, production notes, everything was gone or classified. Former crew members, if contacted, refused to speak about their involvement, either out of fear or due to strict non-disclosure agreements that were rumored to carry unusually severe penalties. Some speculated that Spielberg had felt a personal responsibility, even guilt, for what he had created. They believed he saw the film not as a failed artistic experiment, but as a dangerous object, a piece of media capable of inflicting real harm. This was not a story about censorship by conservative forces or a studio protecting its brand. This was a story about a creator voluntarily suppressing his own work for the safety of others. Over time, conspiracy theories flourished. Some believed the film contained subliminal messages or experimental sound frequencies that triggered psychological breakdowns. Others speculated that artificial intelligence or hypnotic visual patterns were used to manipulate the subconscious mind. There were even rumors that certain scenes were based on classified psychological research, studies conducted in secrecy, exploring the limits of human fear and mental resilience. But none of these theories could be confirmed. Without the film itself, without any surviving documentation, all that remained was rumor and legend. The studio maintained its silence. Spielberg never commented publicly, and so the story of the forbidden film became a part of Hollywood mythology. A cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked creativity, about the ethical limits of art, and about the thin line between entertainment and psychological trauma. People continued to search for clues. Obsessive fans tried to track down former employees, hoping for a leaked script page, a surviving storyboard, or even a production still. Nothing ever surfaced. If anyone possessed evidence of the film's existence, they were either bound by legal restrictions or unwilling to face the consequences of revealing it. And so the film remained lost, locked away, unseen, untouched, an artifact of cinema too powerful and too dangerous for the world to experience. According to the legend, it would stay there forever, in the dark, waiting. Chapter 5. Traces that could not be erased. Despite the complete destruction of the film, strange traces of its existence continued to surface over the years. Whispers of its content and its terrifying power did not disappear with the burning of the script or the locking away of the film reels. In fact, it was almost as if the attempts to erase it only made the legend stronger. On internet forums of the early 2000s, anonymous users began to share bizarre stories. These forums, often hidden deep in obscure corners of the web, were filled with cryptic posts allegedly written by former studio employees, technicians, and even security staff who had somehow come into contact with fragments of the mysterious project. These accounts were rarely direct and almost never provided concrete proof, but they all shared disturbing similarities. Some users claimed to have seen isolated scenes from the forbidden film. According to their descriptions, the footage did not resemble a typical horror movie. The images were blurred, unstable, as though reality itself was beginning to break apart on the screen. The environment in the scenes seemed to melt or vibrate, making it impossible to distinguish between what was real and what was a hallucination. Faces in the film would shift or dissolve mid-sentence. Everyday objects would transform or move unnaturally. Others described the audio as even more disturbing than the visuals. There were voices speaking in a language no one could identify, a harsh, rhythmical dialect that seemed to bypass conscious understanding and burrow directly into the subconscious. Listeners reported feeling intense discomfort, dizziness, and even nausea after hearing only a few seconds of these recordings. Rumors circulated that the film incorporated real hypnotic patterns and forbidden psychoacoustic effects, sound frequencies designed to induce trance states or anxiety, frequencies supposedly banned from commercial media. One recurring element in these testimonies was the description of a long, continuous shot where the camera would slowly move through a seemingly endless corridor. The walls were covered in symbols that flickered imperceptibly. Some symbols were familiar, ancient religious signs, alchemical glyphs, but many were completely unknown. Forum users speculated that these symbols were part of an experimental attempt to trigger involuntary mental responses in the viewer. Those who claimed to have seen this scene often described a growing sense of dread, as if the corridor was not just a physical space but a representation of something deeper, perhaps the inner layers of the human mind or a descent into madness. Another often cited fragment involved a scene in which characters would suddenly lose the ability to perceive time correctly. Movements became disjointed. Sounds were stretched or compressed unnaturally. One user wrote that the film had moments where seconds lasted forever, and whole minutes vanished in an instant, leaving viewers disoriented and vulnerable to suggestion. These effects went far beyond normal cinematic techniques. They were described as invasive, almost predatory. Some claimed that these psychological effects were not accidental. There were persistent rumors that Spielberg's team, or someone within the studio, had worked with fringe scientists or underground researchers of human consciousness. Allegedly, techniques from controversial psychological experiments were adapted for the film. Patterns of color, light, and sound were supposedly engineered to affect the viewer's heart rate, breathing, and emotional stability without them realizing it. Even more disturbing were the posts from people who claimed to have encountered audio fragments from the film. These were never more than a few seconds long, poorly recorded and often buried in strange online archives. Yet those who listened to them often regretted it immediately. Some reported migraines, nightmares, or a lingering sense of unease that lasted for days. Certain forums warned their members never to seek out these fragments, claiming that they were cursed or dangerous. Over time, the legend of the film mutated. It was no longer just an unreleased Spielberg project. It became a digital ghost. The more the studio tried to erase it, the more its traces seemed to appear in places no one expected. Mentions of the project were found in deleted email archives, in the margins of old production documents sold at auctions, and in anonymous blog posts that vanished soon after being published. Some believed that a single copy of the film still existed, carefully hidden away in the studio's private archives. Access to this vault was supposedly restricted to the highest levels of the company's ownership, protected by extreme security protocols. Yet despite this, the story refused to die. It was as if the film itself left a residue, a stain on the collective memory of those who had come too close to it. By the mid-2000s, online communities dedicated to lost media began to catalog everything they could find about the project. Theories flourished, growing wilder with each passing year. Some thought the film was part of a larger experiment in media control. Others suggested it was cursed, or that it accidentally opened a window into some deeper, incomprehensible reality. Regardless of the truth, one thing was certain: the traces of the film could not be fully erased. They lived on in fragments of rumor, corrupted audio files, half-remembered images, and the haunted testimonies of those who claimed to have glimpsed something they were never meant to see. Chapter 6. But what if a copy still exists? In the years that followed, the legend of Whisper Lane evolved into something darker, something almost parasitic in the way it clung to the forgotten corners of the internet. It was no longer just a ghost story shared on outdated forums or a half-remembered rumor from studio employees. It became an obsession for certain people, collectors of forbidden media, archivists of lost films, and those who chased after the unsolvable mysteries of digital folklore. In the shadows of the darknet, rumors began to spread. There were claims, unverifiable, always anonymous, that fragments of the original Whisper Lane film had surfaced. Sellers with encrypted profiles allegedly offered reels of degraded, flickering footage to buyers willing to part with unimaginable sums of money. Payment was demanded in untraceable cryptocurrency. Locations of exchanges were whispered in code. The price of obsession was steep, not only in money but in risk. No one credible ever confirmed acquiring these fragments. No screenshots, no watermarked clips, no solid proof ever reached the surface web. Every supposed lead would either dead-end or mysteriously vanish. Entire threads would disappear overnight from niche forums. Archived pages would return blank errors. Even cached versions were often found corrupted or inexplicably empty. It was as though the very act of searching for the film triggered an unseen mechanism of erasure. Independent researchers and digital archaeologists, bloggers, conspiracy theorists, forgotten YouTube channels tried to piece together the puzzle. They analyzed metadata, traced old DNS records, studied the accounts of those who claimed to have worked on the production. They interviewed former employees who spoke in hesitant, cryptic language. But the deeper anyone dug, the more they encountered something chilling: a pattern of rapid, almost surgical deletion. Entire blogs dedicated to Whisper Lane research would shut down overnight. Contact emails stopped working. Video essays would vanish from streaming platforms without explanation, flagged not for copyright but for psychological harm or violations of abstract community guidelines. The internet had millions of forgotten stories, but this one seemed actively hunted. The very absence of evidence became its own proof in certain circles. There was something undeniably strange about how efficiently any mention of Whisper Lane was erased. No film, no matter how controversial or obscure, had generated such relentless suppression. It was as though someone or something wanted the legend to survive, but only as legend, never as fact. The question persisted, haunting message boards and private chat groups like a slow-moving virus. What if a copy still existed? What if somewhere on a forgotten hard drive, inside a private collection, in the vault of a silent collector, the film sat waiting? Unseen for decades, its content unchanged, its effects unsoftened by time. Some speculated that the suppression wasn't about legal rights or morality, but about safety. If the stories were true about the film's use of hypnotic patterns, forbidden psychoacoustic effects, or its ability to destabilize perception, then perhaps the world wasn't meant to see it again. Perhaps Whisper Lane wasn't just a lost movie. Perhaps it was a kind of weapon, and yet the legend would not die. In fact, the very effort to erase it only deepened its power. Every disappearance of evidence was treated as validation. Every deleted post, every vanished account, every scrubbed archive was seen as another piece of the puzzle, a confirmation that somewhere, in some locked room or forgotten server, Whisper Lane still existed. The final question remained, looming in the silence of forgotten forums and encrypted chat rooms. What if one day it resurfaces? What if someone reckless enough or powerful enough decides to show it to the world? Would people watch out of morbid curiosity, knowing the risks? Would it be uploaded for millions to see in a single catastrophic moment? Or worse, had someone already seen it and were they waiting for the right time to share it? No one knew, and perhaps that uncertainty was the most dangerous thing of all.